Manus and seomra spraoi. Seomra spraoi was a hub of resistance. The space was located just off the quays, close to Dublin city centre. It was used to organise against Shell Oil's Mayo pipeline, the World Bank, and deportations of non-nationals, among many other worthwhile causes. The fact that seomra spraoi was closed down under fire regulations was hardly surprising. The fact that it was allowed to stay open for so long was due to seomra spraoi's lack of visibility, and the fact that the authorities perceived them as being ineffective. No doubt the police raid in seomra spraoi the week before the centre's closure provided them with evidence that seomra spraoi could be a nuisance too, and possibly even have a seed of potential to threaten the authorities. But that's just political spiel. Seomra spraoi was also a social centre where personal stories unfolded. Manus had just broken up in a relationship. The woman had moved out, and even though he had custody of their child for more than half the week, he still felt a big gap in his life. Even more so when Sharifa, their child, went to her mother's and he was left alone. Mentally, physically and economically, Manus couldn't afford the pubs. And while he could pass the time with books, he still craved human contact. For Manus, seomra spraoi was manna from heaven. He didn't particularly want to join a group, but seomra spraoi wasn't about belonging to a group. A social club, drop-in resource centre, non-profit based, non-hierarchical, run for and by the people who used it. Funds were raised by donations and by putting on gigs. Non-profit based, non-hierarchical, run for and by the people who used it. That was the idea. The ideal to which the centre aspired. Of course, ideals and humans don't always fit perfectly together. It's hard once you've invested time and energy into creating and maintaining something to think of it in any other way but as your baby. It may belong to everybody, but it belongs more to you. Unofficial hierarchies and cliques seem to evolve naturally, regardless of ideologies. But having said that, the centre did its best, and its best was pretty good. Sundays had some activities specifically for kids, but the centre was considered child-friendly in general. Sharifa loved it. It was funhouse. It was centre. Well, there was lots of space, toys. Even when there were no people her own age there, the older people took an interest in her, made allowances for her, and in general showed her the respect we were all due. That old saying, it takes a whole village to bring up a young person. And seomra spraoi was as close to a village as could be found anywhere in Dublin. Manus was enjoying bringing her up in the right type of atmosphere, an atmosphere of mutual respect. It was in seomra spraoi that Sharifa and Manus heard about the protest against the World Bank, and Manus and Sharifa, along with a handful of others, decided to go protest. We do very well out of it, Manus explained to his daughter. It's because people in other countries are kept so poor that we are rich. Sharifa nodded her 2.5-year-old head and looked serious. Manus laughed. He wondered on his motivation for attending the protest. There was only a dozen or so people there. Manus wondered about that too. How come there was so few people protesting? Did everybody believe the world order was set in concrete and could never be changed? That protest was futile? Or did nobody else care that the poorest countries in the world were having to pay the richest countries in the world lots of money? And as a direct consequence, thousands of people lived and died with intolerable hardship. People's apathy amounted to criminal negligence. Manus applied Nomi baby's example to himself and felt like a German civilian during the Second World War, looking at the smoke coming out of the chimneys and saying, I'm really not sure what's happening in there, and even if I was, what could I do about it? Manus didn't feel like he was doing much, but he supposed standing in the cold outside a hotel where members of the World Bank were meeting and saying, boo, was better than doing nothing. The protest in Malahide was a day out for Manus and Sharifa. After a few hours, they headed off and had cake and coffee and a calf with 2 single-parent mums and their kids. Manus was a single-parent dad, and he had to get used to the idea. He had to start looking at other women, or looking for another woman, Phrases like back on the hunt or back on the market or on the hunt now applied to him. Mostly he had enjoyed monogamy, but he wasn't cut out for abstinence. These women seemed sensitive, intelligent, strong, independent, and politically aware lefty types. Manus was pleased just to know they existed, and pleased to sit with them. He wondered if he would stand any chance with them. Either of them. Wouldn't matter to him. Wasn't he supposed to have a preference? He would have been hard pressed to decide. He supposed his need denied him preference. One of the women seemed younger than the other, more impulsive. He had vague recollections of other women he had known when he had been younger. Impulsive times. Manus wondered on the reality of living with either of these women over a period of years. He had flashes of both women wearing completely different faces from the pleasant personas they presented at the moment. How far away were the faces of anger or pain? How long before he would see those faces? And he couldn't help wondering how they would be with their eyes glazed over and that animal look that came out during sex. Manus had made a few quid that morning. It was the first he had made in months, and he was pleased to have money in his pocket. He offered to buy dinners and wine at the cafe, but the women both refused. He didn't know either of them very well, and on top of that, they were a different gender to him. He would have bought a meal for anyone, and was pleased to be able to offer, and pleased with the opportunity to sit at a table with two adults who brought their kids to protest against the World Bank. But that didn't take away from the fact that he was a mateless male, and these were two seemingly mateless females. Was he trying to show he could put meat on the table? A good hunter or earner? He wondered now if he was making a blatant play for the women, or just being human and wanting to share his good fortune. In any event, they both refused dinner. The single-parent mums were younger than him. Everyone was younger than him. They all travelled back on the train together, the three lone parents and their three children. One of the women told a story about a skeleton that gave one of its bones to make soup, but when the soup wasn't shared out, the skeleton chased the nasty people out and let a poor little boy stay in the house. The story kept the kids happy the whole way back. Manus couldn't help making comparisons between the women and Sharifa's mum. Sharifa's mum, Janice, was 31, going on 19. She longed for the heady social life of her late teens and early 20s. For Janice, things had taken on a distinct downward turn around the year 2001, when she had been 24 years old and had met Manus for the first time. For Jan, the relationship was never meant to be anything more than a cheap thrill for a fleeting moment, the satisfaction of idle and lustful curiosity. But what should have been a passing fling turned into a prolonged nightmare. She felt trapped by her pregnancy too, and her relationship with this man, the older man, someone from another place and another time. She had even been unfaithful to him as a plea-like ploy to get him to end it. Shagging someone else had always worked before, but not with Manus. He stuck like shit to her shoe, just to make her suffer, she sometimes thought. Janice fought against it and in many ways denied the relationship most of the time. But due to convenience and economic restrictions, she had ended up living in the same space and even sharing the same bed as Manus for the best part of 6 years. A savings fund her grandfather had made for her came to fruition, paid her out 20 grand, and she was free to do other things. Janice and Manus were now officially broken up. That is, they no longer lived in the same house or slept in the same bed, but they still had to deal with each other. Throughout their relationship, Janice had fluctuated between being churlish and rude to being needy and crying. Sometimes she needed his emotional support. Sometimes she just wanted him in bed. The breakup hadn't changed the nature of the relationship. When she needed him, or even just wanted him, she'd only to ask and he would be down like a shot, panting like a puppy on her porch. Occasionally he might hesitate for a moment, but it seemed so pointless. Why would he lie on his own and deny himself the warmth and pleasure of her body? There were a few reasons why. because when she was finished with him, she might pat his crutch and say, "You were always a great shag." She would think she was flattering. There was usually a part of him wanted to quote Billie Holiday. "You've had the best, now why not take the rest? Come on, have all of me." But Jan didn't want the rest. The part she didn't want felt lonely and rejected. She would never let him stay a night. He would feel like the dog getting put out at the end of the day. He tried to rationalise that lots of people would love such a relationship, sex, and then piss off. But somehow it did not always appeal to him. Looked at from a certain slant of rationality, Jan was doing everyone a favour, breaking out of a relationship she felt trapped by. Manus didn't always look at it from that particular slant of rationality. It's funny how unrequited love can turn to hate. But then, life could sometimes be seen as a very funny experience. Even more so, it's to be supposed if you were living in the wealthy West. And Manus was living in the wealthy West. Manus brought Sharifa to a protest against deportations. Manus had friends deported out of Ireland. It annoyed him. He had felt frustration. He had felt angry. He didn't have that many friends and couldn't afford to lose any. One of his friends had been called Addy. They'd met in a border town. They both lived in the same housing estate. They both felt very isolated amongst the remnants of die-hard nationalism and alcoholism that seemed to dominate the estate. They met regular for over a year, never doing much more than smoking African bushwood and talking or listening to music. But little bits of contact like that were an oasis of human interaction in Manus's otherwise desert-like social existence. Manus felt close to Addy. Then one day Manus got a message on his mobile saying Addy was in prison and asking for help. And he didn't know how to help him. He never heard from Addy again. Apart from feeling useless and guilty, Manus didn't know what he could do. So now the government was having a pre-Christmas roundup of Nigerian fathers. They would be deported, and hopefully their wives and children would follow them back. Manus was angry about the loss of his friends, and angry that the government still used the tactic of separating fathers from their children. If anyone, for any reason, thought they had the right to separate Manus and Sharifa, they were wrong. They had no such right. Manus was sure of that. He got himself a bit worked up as he walked down to the protest. Sharifa was sleeping in the buggy. He stood outside the immigration office with a dozen others. He was given a placard that read, "No deportations." He was glad to show some of the people going into the building that not everyone in Ireland thought they should be sent away. Let's try to understand the motivation behind the protesters. Old women, young women, old men, young men, all with a desire to say something about an injustice. A racist. This one was a male in his 30s. This one was poor and uneducated, unemployed and socially deprived. Went by and shouted, "Shouldn't let the black bastards in the first place." The words, "Fucking wanker," erupted out of Manus in a loud and violence-threatening voice. It was always impossible dealing with blind ignorance and hatred. Manus dealt with a lot of it as a child on Belfast's Armour Road. Then it was called sectarianism. Tags out would get painted on the walls, and he and other people were chased through the streets, and sometimes people were caught and killed, stone dead, because they were tags. Manus could never really figure it. Perpetrators of this type of crime were often individuals with defects, which they tried to compensate for by showing their ability to hate. They acted under the influence of the crowd, and the crowd had a low IQ. The newspapers, clerics, and bosses told them it was right to have contempt for people even slightly different from themselves. As a child, Manus could never figure how people who had never met him could hate him. And there'd be no chance to talk, to try and rationalise. These people wanted to stop you talking, stamp out your rationale. Manus's instant and uncontrolled reaction at the racist statement had shocked Manus by the depth of violence it carried in its tone, by its vicious rage. It shocked the racist too, who kept moving for a bit but then decided to come back and stand up for his right to be a loudmouthed racist. Who called me a wanker? Were you looking for a fight? Manus followed his breath closely as he took off his shoulder bag full of nappies and wipes, set it gently on the child's buggy and stepped out to meet his would-be assailant. You looking for a fight? The man repeated. Manus felt healthy enough and reasonably centred. Still, the man could get a blow or two in, and Manus tried to keep his eyes on the other's feet and fists. A headbutt would also be a possibility as they squared up. Crossed Manus's mind as he approached that it might be best to just lash out with his foot. He was glad he had a heavy shoe on, and if it was going to happen, it would be best if he could get the first blows in. It would take any waiting out of the way for a start. How would it look on camera? Were they on CCTV camera? Could the camera tell that this racist, heading towards Manus saying, "Are you looking for a fight?" wasn't out of it with nothing to lose? Maybe Manus could just stand him down. As he got closer, Manus cursed his own stupidity for having brought a Plymouth draw with him to a protest. Manus wasn't the brightest. Then he had Sharifa with him, and if they arrested Manus, what would they do with his daughter? Manus squared up to the man. Just leave, said Manus. And luckily for Manus, the racist left. Pauline stuck a small camera in Manus's face just as the racist left. She asked Manus how he felt. Manus had felt slightly overwhelmed by the spontaneity and ferocity of his own reaction, but all he said to Pauline was, "I feel too emotional about the whole thing. I just wish they'd stop this shit." He wasn't even clear about what shit he was talking about. Racism, deportations, the world press being in the hands of a few corporations and influencing very strongly the world's actions and very thoughts. All of the above, he supposed. Sharifa woke up hungry and a bit grumpy. After the protest, he brought her around a seomra spraoi. They boiled some rice and had it with yogurt. Pauline's daughter played well with Sharifa. So did Patricia. Pauline was about the same age as Manus. Patricia wouldn't have been half his age. Both females seemed fit and healthy, and he wondered if either of them would consider him as someone worth a shag. He wondered quite coldly. He seemed more detached than the sexual needs usually allowed. Did detachment come with age? He wondered if he was worth a look or an interest. Both women seemed worth a lot to him. Human contact was worth a lot to Manus, and although he still worshipped sex more than money or any other god, he sometimes preferred it when sexuality took a back seat to a more rounded, fully human interaction. Seomra spraoi was a different social setting from most, so slightly different social relations were possible. Manus didn't feel like he had a need to show sexual interest in anyone, nor did he feel offended if no one showed that type of interest in him. Not too offended anyway. In truth, Manus doubted his ability to go with anyone other than the mother of his child. She was the only one he'd known in 6 years. He figured he would miss the familiarity, maybe resent intimacy's break in continuity. Maybe he was just scared of the unknown. The police closed seomra spraoi down under the fire regulations. Manus felt a terrible sense of loss at the news. He felt isolated again. Where would he go? Where would he bring his daughter? With nowhere else to go, Manus called on two people he knew. Seamus from County Clare had turned again to smack. Gani from Nigeria had turned again to Christianity. Manus turned first to alcohol and then scribbling. Seomra spraoi would open again, even if it was in another building. Seomra spraoi was a centre where people could get together and exchange ideas and be creative. Seomra spraoi was a part of a social revolution. But that's just political, rather than personal spiel.